Good afternoon, everyone. Are pretty excited around our topic that we're going to get into today. But before we do that, Mr. Francis, how is the weekend going?
Everything's going pretty good. It's been really busy, but I'm happy to sit down and talk about the next topic for the Gentleman's Standard.
Our next topic being, which we thought would be a perfect build off of our initial, which was laying the foundation, grooming towards what we called greatness, and the importance of establishing a self-imposed responsible approach to grooming, and setting a standard in that particular space. We tackled that topic across a varying number of degrees. We've had some great positive feedback on that from individuals that had a chance to listen to our initial launch podcast, which we're pretty excited and stoked about. So we want to go down another rabbit hole as it relates to setting a standard and not following one, and that is the importance of command and presence. And as we get into this topic, this episode is going to be all about what happens after you walk into the room. Our focus is presence is felt before it's heard. Command and presence is something that a lot of folks struggle with. The topic that I know I generally have heard in the corporate environment is feeling like you're an imposter. And that is because you haven't laid the necessary foundation down to feel like you belong. And we're going to look to get into that. Our ultimate goal is for active listeners, participants, our community, from a gentleman standard perspective, pose questions to us, give us feedback, things that we can react to. We've already started receiving some of that from our initial launch submission that was around grooming and greatness. And hopefully we're providing some great feedback and insights that you can react to and hopefully implement in your day-to-day routines. And that's our ultimate goal. So as we go down path on this, I want to kick it over to Mr. Francis as we think about starting with a moment where everything begins at the entrance and really start thinking about how a man enters a room, which is where we go to start our initial dialogue and discussion down path, the first impression piece of it, the energy, pace, and awareness as you're going down path and thinking through this from a corporate perspective, a boardroom perspective, entertainment industry perspective, providing you observations from a leadership-based view. So I want to kick it over to Yor-El to start talking about how we go about entering a room with the right level of command and presence.
Absolutely. So you've done all the homework, you've prepared, and you finally made it to the room. How do you walk in? Are you full of excitement? Are you walking in gushing? Are you walking in sweaty? Are you walking in confident? And the key with that, again, is based on the room. When people say read the room, they're not just throwing out mantras just for throwing out sake. It's very important. Read the room, but then what is your purpose in that room? What are you trying to get out of being in that room? And that actually answers how you walk into it. It's like you have to. It's like knowing your end goal. Again, it goes back to what we talk about visualization. Knowing what your end goal is before you get into that room, walking into the room with that intention, and that is how you enter it, from my perspective.
One of the things, as you kind of think about it from a corporate-based perspective, and this is where early in my career, at points in time during my career, to be honest with you, I've entered into spaces where I felt my focus is around being accepted, right? And that's when you start challenging yourself consistently. Your mind plays games with you. And one of the things that I identified, first impressions were formed immediately. We wanted to, as you do research around yourself and ways that you show up in this space. Princeton University had a study on there. I wanted to kind of pull this in. I thought it was apropos. And the insight that it provided was that by the time you've decided what to say, the room has already decided who you are. And that's where you get into that imposter syndrome piece, right? Have you done the necessary things to ensure that the package speaks for itself before people can get to your value? We talked about that in the last grooming session. Your entrance, your posture, things like that resonate around setting up who you are and how you will be perceived. Exposure comes along with that. Those are things that are going to build upon itself. When you enter into the room, are you slumping? You've done all the necessary things to ensure that your grooming's in check, right? That you've appropriately armed yourself and weaponized your appearance per your strategy, which is, listen, I've got to dress right, act right, look right for the moment, whatever that moment may be. I'm not saying dress in a suit, right? This is not direction to say go to the mall and buy a bunch of suits or go to a designer or a clothier, and there's a bunch of them. I have some awesome ones that I'm going to promote as we go through this process. I deal with quite frequently from across the globe. as we pulled through, it is all about the fact that I've armed myself effectively so that when I show up in this space and I have a strategy, in every room I enter into, I have a strategy, right? Whether it be professionally or personally. Those that are single have a strategy on what they want to do to not be single or remain single from that standpoint, or get, with whatever you want down path in a professional setting. Those that are in the professional space have a strategy on people they want to meet, and what they've done to articulate their vision around how I'm going to deploy and execute against my overall goal. And if you don't, and you enter a room and you're just freewheeling it, which is going to happen, it's life. There's certain places and spaces you end up in, you have no intention of doing anything except just being there. Or for those folks that don't like being out all the time, listen, who's over there and you end up there? Sometimes you just, it's the bare bones minimum. But generally, when you're in a room, you have a strategy. And if you have not armed yourself effectively enough, you start running into these areas of where you don't have the right entrance, you don't have the right posture, and you get into that. It is something that where you're a victim before you're even approached. Your composure, your posture, and all those things speak to them, and you will get overlooked. You will get passed over. You will be seen as somebody that's disheveled. And do I really want to do business, whether it be professionally or personally, with this individual? Your command has to speak for itself. You have to practice in that way, and that takes into consideration everything. Your external package and your internal view. This is how I went away from feeling like an imposter early on in my career, and at some point in times during my career, and even later in my career, where it's like it's another room. I don't know as much as everybody else that's in here. But one thing I do really, really well is people. And when I know I can lean in on that and execute that effectively based off my strategy and meet the right individuals that are going to help me negotiate and move things down path, I have a way of going about that. You cannot out people me. When I'm in a room, you can out analytics me, you can out insight me, you can think of any line of business in the corporate space, for individuals that have PhDs, etc. There will always be smarter people in your room for one thing, but they will not nail everything. And that's what you have to think about when you enter into a room from a command and presence. How have I built the one thing that I do well and execute it flawlessly? To do that, you have to ensure all the other things are checked. And
I
that's where
think
that
that,
Fritzen thing resonated with me.
yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, it goes back to what is your intention in the room.
Hmm.
I think it's like, so I've been in rooms where I'm leading the room. So if I'm leading the room, my intention in that room is completely different from if I'm just in the room where it's a space where I'm interacting with others. And it's just like understanding that dynamic. If I'm leading the room, I'm in there, I'm focused, I'm conducting a meeting, I'm in charge. If I'm going into a room to learn and gain information, I'm curious, I'm meeting people, I'm introducing myself, I'm being open to receiving whatever ideas come my way. And I think it's just playing along with understanding the dynamics of what you are doing and what your purpose is in those spaces. And for me, it's been a plurality of things. It's sort of like you are a chameleon and you just kind of morph into what that room needs at the moment for, at least in the entertainment space, that a specific moment. Like, because rooms change. It could be a writer's room, it could be a producing room, it could be so many different things. And there are different ways and different dynamics that you definitely have to be aware of as you navigate those spaces.
Have you found what individuals that have come into your presence, especially in places where you're leading the room? What have you found when individuals have entered in and just completely devalued themselves to you, in your opinion, from when you've experienced an individuals come in where they don't have great command?
I think that it starts with asking things that have already been discussed.
Mm,
And it shows that you're not really paying attention.
gotcha, gotcha, gotcha,
And
gotcha.
so everybody kind of just you're immediately devaluing yourself because it's like it's sort of like you're chiming in to chime up, but your chiming in has no value.
Mm,
Does that make any
it
sense?
does.
So it's sort of like, yeah, you raise your hand, but what you're saying is something that's been repeated maybe 5 different times, and what you're going to be repeating now is not going to make it any different than the fourth person who said it before you. So that's one way somebody can easily devalue yourself or themselves in a space. The second way is by being egregiously late, especially if it's a meeting of peers where you have a time, and I mean, there are excuses for things, and
Yeah.
things happen, life happens. But that, if that turns into habit, it definitely can count against you. So those are two things that, I'd raise my eyebrows at.
The one thing that I keep running into is you can tell within 5 seconds who really belongs and who's trying to belong, right? From that
Mm,
standpoint. And that's the piece of where I think what you got into with individuals coming into rooms and asking questions of things that they should be aware of. They didn't study. They didn't have
hmm
you didn't have a strategy around what you were going in to do and who you were meeting with and what you were going to talk about. What do you generally look for? Taking out in consideration, you may be on time. You're not necessarily late, but that key 5 second piece around who belongs or who's acting like they're belonging. From that standpoint, what advice would you give, especially the young professionals that are trying to avoid falling into that trap in the belonging space?
I would say number one, let's say it's a company meeting and it's a meeting where you are kind of aware of the nuts and bolts. It's not something foreign to you. I'd say be versed in that. I'd say also understand that company meetings, time is a factor. So you don't want to overburden the meeting with excessive nonsense. So, those are all things that just need to be parsed. And then lastly, I'd say company meeting, understanding that this is about disseminating information, receive the information, and if there's anything that's pressing and pertinent, pounce on that, ask those questions as opposed to unnecessary things. Those would be my strategy of going in and out. Because somebody who's conducting a meeting, your goal is to effectively communicate or disseminate the key points of what is to be done. And then the people participating in the meeting, their goal is to receive those points and then go out and execute them. And the longer we stay in the meeting, the longer it takes for you to go out and start executing. So in my space, my job is to get you those points and get you out, as opposed to sitting down and belaboring those points.
So it's funny symmetry between where you are in the entertainment industry versus where we are in corporate, right? A lot of those things line up. And I'm really talking to those are in early career and just looking for, look, I need a blueprint around things I need to
Mhm.
think about. The things I look for individuals that were new to a room or new to the industry and just trying to, pay their dues, as many would put this. There are a couple of key things that I would do to make myself comfortable. It increases your to a degree, and I don't mean this in the way that it's going to come out, but there's an element of ego that we all build towards, right? That you're building towards, and these are ways to help bolster yourself up. And first thing I always try to do is I walk slower than average when I'm entering into a room. It's like all eyes are on me, whether they're not, or whether they are or aren't. Understand that potentially they could be. So I generally tend to take my time as though you're being announced, whatever that,
Mhm.
that silent horn may be as you're coming through. Walk in slower than you're used to than average. You will see how you generally feel. It's like, who is this person from that standpoint? Shoulders relaxed, chin level from that standpoint. You're now putting yourself in practice, right? For what's the entertainment term that you feel like you're the proponent of the scene,
Mm.
if I'm saying that right, or probably not, but you feel as you're the main actor in that particular scene. Everything is a scene. I talk about
You're
everything
the
as a movie.
protagonist.
The protagonist, there you
Right.
go, the protagonist.
Mhm.
Everything is a scene from that standpoint. And your eyes are scanning, not darting around the room. Darting eyes tell you you're nervous, right? We can spot you a mile away. And individuals that have been in those rooms, it's basically the Serengeti. We know when somebody is brand new to this and practiced quickly and not prepared. There's a difference. A couple of key things that you want to kind of think about and take away that I've pulled from mentors, and I'm going to use mentor feedback that I've gotten forever in the corporate space. But I want to be clear because these are the things that really resonated with me. Is your entrance is your introduction, whether you speak or not. Right. So that whole walking in slower than average from that standpoint, whether you have a talking part as a protagonist in that scene, your entrance speaks for that. Somebody's going to pick up on that. And you need to be mindful of that as you're going through the process. Another thing is most men rush in, composed men arrive. That's the difference. If you
That's
play these in your mind as you're going through this process, there are people that are rushing in the meeting. There are folks that run these meetings. You will see Yor-El Francis getting into a meeting. He's coming in with a cup of coffee, gone through whatever it is lane in Atlanta. It takes forever for him to get there to not be late. He can slam his coffee down. He can come in rushed. But those individuals that are trying to impress upon him are going to ensure that they arrive, not just rush in from that standpoint. And that was feedback that resonated with me early in my career. And you don't walk in looking for attention, you walk in prepared to command it. These are things that set the tone for me as I was going through this process. And it was funny, I talked to you about some studies that were done, right? So you talked about, we went down the path a little bit on um, the verbal component, right?
Mhm.
From that standpoint, UCLA had a study that I wanted to pull up, suggests that 55% of communication is body language and 38% is tone, and only 7% are words.
Wow.
The key thing I took out of this is that people don't really listen to your words first. They generally don't. It was interesting when I saw some of this. They read your body and then they decide if your words matter. Now think about that. Take that into the personal setting and what we try to do as it relates to command. I was one early on. I'm a very verbal person. I can be a very verbal person. And when you're nervous, you talk a lot. You talk really fast as you try to get through things. And I was doing that in certain meetings and just not getting the deals coming my way. I found that folks didn't really trust me because the more you talk and the faster you talk, they went into your work, they went into your decks, they went into your presentations, and I'm like, well, what you're saying is follow. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff here. What are we doing? You got to be a really good storyteller from that standpoint, and they have to feel good about your aura, which is really what we're talking around command. That
Mhm.
moves mountains for you to get things done. But when you're brand new to a room and you're suffering from imposter syndrome, you fall into all the classic traps that we are all paying attention to. You think we're not noticing them, and we are. But to get to that place where your command and presence is something that you trust, you've got to have the foundations laid out that we talked about. I mean, I'm hoping
100%.
that makes sense of what you experience in the entertainment space as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say that in this modern world, rooms aren't always in person. Rooms are now digital. And so we should keep that in mind that these tenets apply to digital rooms as well. I would advise, if it's a digital room, you they're on time. Raise your hand to speak. Just follow all the protocols that are necessary and be impactful with what you're saying. Choose your words. Is it like the study said, those words matter. So you want them to resonate and hit the audience you're trying to gain or engage with impact, as opposed to just air and space. So I think it goes right into our next segment, which is the power of saying
Mhm.
less. And that's a very powerful thing that I adopted early on in staging my meetings. I realized that sometimes people would just take a subject and just go on and on and on. And I would just introduce the
Mhm.
subject, say a little bit about it, and then engage people to talk about it. And I think that just, it opens it up because it brings others into the conversation as opposed to just me just talking. So I think restraint and talking versus value are definitely things we could discuss.
So, so I suffer from this. I suffer from this forever. It's funny. As you go down path on things, and it's I had a leader for a while that followed me through my career journey and path, and he labeled something to me. He called me Professor Burrowes. And it was later in my career. What you generally tend to want to do, especially in corporate settings. Listen, I've prepared myself. I've nailed my command. I feel really good. The whole protagonist concept and mindset as you're walking through, as they say, you start smelling yourself as you enter into certain
Mhm.
rooms. The challenge with that is what you generally tend to do is you want to over explain something because you feel as though you need to know every nook and cranny of where I got to where I am. And what tends to happen is the more you do that, the less trust you receive from individuals. You have to master the art of storytelling. You say less to say more from that standpoint. And the way I took it is over talking is one of my notes. Over talking lowers perceived authority. The more you talk about something, people feel
Mm.
as though you don't have an expertise on it. The more you can let things breathe relative to a topic, and especially from a command and presence based perspective. You've already done the work to make sure that your presence and aura is speaking for you. Don't let the talking kneecap that situation, which is what we generally tend to do. I'm assuming in the entertainment space you experience that from time to time.
I mean, yeah, I think that it's
Yeah.
universal. And I think that it just harkens back to, what we've underscored. Over talking equals you lose the
Hmm.
audience. And so if you're conducting a a meeting and you're on a time frame, others are on a time frame as well. So the idea is to disseminate, unfortunately, I conduct a lot of meetings, so I'm coming from that perspective. But so it's like your idea, your job is right there to give out crucial, important information, and then you want it also absorbed. I know that you and I can both count the number of meetings we've been in where people just drone on, and you zone out. That's just human nature. You drone out, and it's like, and then when it moves on to the next subject or the next person, you're like, okay, let's see what they have to say. So I definitely believe that words are important. I think that study hit it on the
Uh-huh.
nail. It's important to choose what you're saying. And then it's important to, and this is the thing that I learned early on, it's okay to just stop. There is nothing wrong with stopping and
Mhm.
silence and having the meeting proceed. It is okay because it's like it lets people understand that you've said what you had to
Yeah.
say. You don't need to go on. Stop.
The I've always found, and I have this in my interactions. I tell this to mentees all the time. Silence builds intrigue. The dark and
Hmm.
mysterious applies in the corporate space too, by the way. Right? It applies in all industry. Silence builds intrigue.
It's a trope it's human nature again. It works.
It has to come along with your strategy and plan. Another point to add on is just measured speech equals confidence, as we're kind of going through from that standpoint. Have you come across somebody? It's funny. Have you come across somebody who's talked themselves out of respect? And you don't
All
have
the
to say
time.
any names
I mean,
or any roles.
no, I've been in rooms where we were talking about, a whole different subject matter, and somebody just keeps harping on something that is not related to anything we're talking about. And afterwards, we convene and we're like, so yeah, clearly that person is singled out because it's like, what was going
Hmm.
on there? Because it's like, we are here to talk about A, not
Yeah.
Z. And all this person kept doing was harping on Z. And it's like, this is not the space. And again, it's about that was their intention. So it actually goes right back to intention in walking into the room. That was their intention. So their intention was to walk in a room and discuss that subject matter. However, did they meet their objective? Because they turned off the rest of the people who were in
Hmm.
that room. And so we stopped listening
Hmm.
immediately. It wasn't the time, it wasn't the place. So how did that person, was that a success? I would say no, and so it comes back to understanding intention and what the outcome will be. If you haven't visualized how you attack this and how the outcome you think will be, then you're wasting your time.
A point you brought up that I want people to kind of take home is strategic pauses in executive settings is key. You said take a beat, take a moment, right? As you're going through this process,
Absolutely.
that has to be a part of your strategy. You've done all the necessary work to make sure you show up well. Don't talk yourself out of respect. From that standpoint, if you're not talking, I said earlier, the one thing you're not going to outdo me on is people. That is, it sounds easy, but depending on industry and the industry you're based in, that's a lot of observing. That's a lot of being quiet and just shutting up from that standpoint and studying the room. What ends up happening, you study people, you study mannerisms, and you're able to categorize. Okay, I've run into this before. This is what I'm going to have to do to ensure that my end goal is accomplished, and these are the people that are going to help me. The only way you can do that is just not talking. Shut the bleep up every once in a while from that standpoint. And the measured speech, equating the confidence and just being slow and steady and purposeful on what we do. This is where it goes into the power of saying less. And this, I'll bring up another research point, right? Harvard Business Review. One of the things that they did, and I brought this up as a note, shows leaders who actively listen are perceived as more competent, likable, and influential. The man
Hmm.
who listens controls the room. Is if you think about it from a mentor-based perspective, again, I'm talking to individuals early in their career, and from a gentleman's standard perspective, the reason that hits is because it makes it seem as though you understand it to the point you made. Do you fully understand what we're talking about before you start weighing in on something totally different? You've done all this work and you show up as though you don't get our point. So now you've been ignored. And by the way, I'm assuming more times than not, they're not aware they're being ignored.
Oblivious.
And that those are some of the challenges as to why you can talk yourself out of respect, and you have to respect the power of saying less.
And those are the circumstances that sometimes you wonder, why am I not being
Hmm.
promoted? Why am I not being picked for this project? Why am I not being, because nobody wants to deal
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell. Nobody wants to
Sure.
deal with that. Like, nobody wants to deal with that because it's like, it's not about being a team player or just being, it's about understanding that what is being discussed can be discussed now, and you can bring that point up for a discussion later. You can ask the person who's conducting the meeting, say, hey, can you put this on the agenda for A, B, C, D, E, or
Sure.
F? And then that will be the subject of that discussion at a later time. And, people sometimes, like I said, they're
Mhm.
oblivious.
As a leader entering into certain rooms, this is the challenge for those that are not early in their career, going down from that standpoint. I often see individuals that are really taking things in as creating necessary, what I call weight, as it relates to a
Mm,
topic that we may be getting this, we may be discussing a deal that we're working towards. I see an individual that's being
mhm.
measured in relation to how they engage as an expert, right or wrong. They may not know what the hell's going on in the room, but that perception's there. And especially if their package is right, you've already added on the value for that individual from that standpoint. Have you had somebody you come across in your travels that's really done that to perfection, that's impressed you as relates to just the measured weight that they bring to the room?
Yeah, I think that's how I learned and understood this is really how you can, just from mentors and, watching other peers as
Yeah.
well who conducted meetings and things of that nature and saw that less was actually
Less is
more.
more.
And so I just adopted that to my style of how I thought meetings should be
Mhm.
conducted or, engaged. And so it just lent itself to speedier meetings, believe it or not, which in my line of work is a
Yeah.
plus.
It's I have a mentor of mine who literally in their meetings would go down path and say, "Look, you've got 30 minutes," and had a
Ah,
what's the
cue
say
cards.
again?
They had cue
No,
cards
no,
that they
not
would
cue
show
not cue
you, or
cards.
they would, oh,
The sand dial, not sand dial. And
got it.
he would literally put that on
Yeah.
the table and was like, the amount of time you have is before that sand runs out. That's
Wow.
telling your story
Hardcore.
effectively, efficiently through their process. Now, you would encourage individuals to speed up, but it was like, no, you need to get to the point and give me a chance to opine, which means you got to drop your gem and be quiet. Let me appreciate the weight of what we're trying to get to, question it from that standpoint, and move on to where we need to do from a solution based perspective. That made a lot of folks better, made me better as we're going through with my teams.
Mhm.
We're really good about being efficient and effective with use of our time. And that's all about space, right? And respecting the spaces afforded to you, how you enter, how you build, and moving from that standpoint. So, a topic I'd love for us to get into that builds off of this is the
Mhm.
whole visual aspect of engaging and from a
Mhm.
command and presence perspective. We've talked about the fact
Mhm.
how you build your foundational standard around how you groomed yourself, how you built your package up, how you respect the weight of the conversation that comes in play, how you enter into a space effectively. Some of that is illustrative, right? So it's your eye contact, it's your posture, it's your stillness as you go through the
Mhm.
process. I'm going to ask you is when you look at being on set, those elements that are there, and how an individual may stick out to you. What are the different things you may have noticed in your travels with actors or others that you've come across that really shown you a great mastery of eye contact, posture, and stillness?
I'll relay a
Hmm.
story. When I first started in the business, I I worked on The West
Yeah.
Wing. I was a trainee on the show, and I didn't know anything about the entertainment business. It was my second show, and that show, they had a way of hazing their trainees, where all the people in charge would just disappear. And so you were basically left to be in charge. And the star of that show was Martin
Hmm.
Sheen. And I was very, very, very fortunate that he actually took the time one day when my observers had walked away to say, this is what you do. This is how you engage the set. You now say A, you now say B. You now say C, you now say D. And he pulled me to the side and he explained all that to me. And weight just
Mm.
fell off my shoulders. And instead of wither, wilting away in the shadows, which is what I wanted to do
Sure, sure.
inside,
It's Martin Sheen, for goodness
uh,
sakes.
he allowed me to stand up and take command of the set by giving me that, I guess you could say, permissive, by giving me that heed, by giving me his, one could say, blessing, because I was sort of like a, deer in headlights. And so I say all that to say that you can be that way in a room. You can be discombobulated and all of that. But what you can also do is then bring it together.
Hmm.
So I say all that to say that the key to, if you're uncomfortable in a room, is sorting yourself out and trying to correct the ship, which is what I was able to do. But I was only able to do it because someone intervened and was able to help me move that along. So it's okay to be uncomfortable in a room. I don't want people to think that you've got to be like machines. We're human,
Yeah.
and all those things are important. It's important to engage. It's important to look people in the eye. But it's okay if you don't know what to do, because everybody starts somewhere. And the key is knowing that you don't know and then being receptive to someone who is going to show you how to do it, which I think I was both, and that's important.
It's so one of the things that we hope to connect with are young professionals that are just trying to get some good insight, right, on how to move their careers along. We're also hoping that we have audience that has made something of themselves within industry that are just looking for different ways to engage or some additional learnings, because you never stop learning, right, in your corporate career. And it's important, who I'm speaking to right now are the individuals that have really found some monikers of success. That it's extremely important on what Martin Sheen did with you to do that, reach back and give that feedback, especially, and think about when you started out in your early career. A lot of us didn't get that, right? Depending on the industry you entered into. And that was a lost opportunity. I harken it back to when we're parents. We're always looking for this magical book that tells us everything to do. And there's only so much that your parents can give you. That book does not necessarily exist. I mean, you can go read as much as you want, and your unique situation will hit you unaware. And as executives, that sit in these rooms, we have to be willing to reach back and hold individuals up, give them feedback and insight. One of the key things you talked about, which really hit me, is it's okay to be unaware. It's okay to be unprepared to a degree. Nail down the things you need to nail down. It'll definitely help you about 50% of the way, right? If you don't want to worry about everything as you enter into a room, but knowing that you don't have all the answers, it's okay to ask for feedback. If you did something, if you did a presentation, if you had a speaking part or whatever, how did I do? Asking feedback is a gift. I heard that early in my career, and it really resonates from that standpoint. But we've got to be able to reach back, right? And say, look, I'm picking up that this individual is struggling. Let me just throw a few gems their way, and hopefully it helps them out. Because if they're better, it's going to help me be better on whatever we're trying to deliver. But a couple of things, just building off of what you said, that I want to make sure comes across as well. The eye contact piece is huge, right? It is not intimidation.
Mm-mm.
It's acknowledging who you're talking to. It's acknowledging and introducing yourself without saying a word, making sure that you're doing that and maintaining that. The more you look away when engaging, especially with those you consider the powerful in the room, the less respect you have. The more you're looking to the ground, the more you're looking all over the place, it shows that you don't have a lot of faith in what you're trying to build towards or the appearance that you're pulling in play. It's important that you hold that. Try holding eye contact and we've got this from our grandfather as an example. Try hold eye contact for 3 seconds or longer, more than normal. Watch what happens, is what I will say. Right? As you go through that process, when you combine that with listening, you become dangerous in the room. It means that you're listening with intention, you're observing through the process. It brings a level of calm. It lets the weight settle through that process, command and presence. Your eye contact can do a lot for you to create that stillness that you need, that builds off the foundation you pulled in play for your command and presence. It is literally, especially in instances where you don't know a lot. right? And you've entered into a room where I'm taking a chance. I've got to get all the other things together so I have that confidence built up, is what I see. The one thing, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this, is understanding, researching your own nervous habits and making it your mission and goal to eliminate them in a room. How did you do that when you were coming up through your travels in your background and your profession?
I think that, and this can segue into our next topic, I think that for me, the key was listening.
Okay.
And as we underscored it, listening is a skill. And sometimes there are things that you have to experience that you won't know. It's like you can't read everything, you can't know everything. And part of learning and experiencing things is listening. And so if you don't have the experience in something and then you're thrown into the fire and you observe in the fire and listen in the fire, I think it becomes information gathering. And that way you're stronger on the other side of the fire.
So I'm trying to build off the point you made here. In a way, it's the listening element, taking a moment to observe your space, is so important to command and presence. It builds off of what we consider to be the primary skill set, which is you appearing as though you're studying,
Mm-hmm.
right? That just takes it over the top to the point you're making. You have to pause and let all the things that you brought into the room have its appropriate time to be respected based off of why you're in said room, from that standpoint. So listening as a skill leading to that is the perfect way to put it. What brings us to the opposite of that is a loud person, which you and I, the reason we got into this is listening to all, and I talked about this in the last episode, is listening to all the feedback given to the youth today, which is, listen, you got to be the alpha male. You got to be the killer. You've got to have that killer instinct and you got to dominate everybody. This is being told to you by folks who are worth millions of dollars or are worth nothing at all and have no applied learning within these spaces, which either way, you do not match to that level from that standpoint. There are a lot more of us that are learning as we go. We're trying to figure out how we show up, and listening is one of the key ways to do that and accomplish that. And by the by, not listening for the sake of a break on when somebody's talking, which is what we find a lot of in the corporate space. And I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But there are a lot more people that I find, and I've had some amazing leaders that I've dealt with, especially female leaders who I've learned so much from. My best leaders have been female leaders, quite frankly, in the corporate environment. I say that from an earnest and love-based perspective. They've taught me so much. I'm listening to you because I value you and I value your opinion. I'm going to pay you that respect versus I'm listening for you to shut the hell up so I can say something. There's a difference. And if you pick that up rather quickly and you get good about, I'm going to listen to what you said, I'm going to take a second to internalize it before I respond and react. That is a practice skill set. And I love that this is our next topic because that was my habit I had to break because I was always listening for you to shut up so I can talk for a while. And I missed a lot along the lines. And that's what led to the point that you made, which is the person's just repeating what I said before. Are they even paying attention? Do you get it? And that's the quickest way to lose authority
Quickest.
when we talk about listening as a skill. That was my nervous habit. So I love that you brought that up. In your travels, as you're engaging with individuals, can you give some feedback or some advice for individuals on how they perfect that as a skill?
I think that just talking about listening can talk about, I won't name this director, but this director, his approach is really interesting. He grew up or came up doing Westerns. And on Westerns, the sets are usually quiet because you don't want to rile up the horses. So his approach to directing has been a quiet set. And he's really not yelling. And then he engages the actors in, well, what do you think? As opposed to most other directors are imbuing actors with what, they want them to think. And, every approach is different and whatever works. But I think it's a style that is effective because this director has been, very successful. So it goes back to the quiet approach. And it goes back to you don't have to be, as loud as everybody else in order to lead. You can listen and be extremely effective. And you can engage and allow the other party in. And that empowers them, which is what you were just talking about with your mentees and having female leaders who engaged you and empowered you in doing so. And that's the whole point of that. You left that stronger. And that's, I think, what makes better teams, so to speak.
As a leader, one of the things I always found is silence allows you to let people fill in the gaps. In a nutshell, it allows them to expose everything to you. Insecurities, whether they respect your authority, whether they respect you being in the room. They are laying out the blueprint for you. If you shut up long enough to let it do its job, which is listening as a skill set, is it will allow the people to tell you the story that you need to navigate down the road in whatever you want to do, whether it's a performance review with an employee, whether it's trying to negotiate a deal, whether, in a line of business with another sector that you need to help you complete what's necessary from a deployment-based perspective. It'll allow you I chair a local board here in the Charlotte market. We've had to be in rooms where we're negotiating certain things for the betterment of families in and around Charlotte. And I generally tend to observe a lot more than I talk in these settings. And people have literally told me everything from the problem to the solution to the challenges along the way when they weren't supposed to, simply because I let them talk. And I afforded them that piece to make that happen. For what I've garnered through my time and in the ways that I give feedback, especially to mentees of mine, is listening is how you get leverage in a nutshell, right? If used appropriately, it is literally how you're going to get leverage. You'd be surprised just asking a quick question, giving people room to breathe, checking for, as they check with you around if you've received the retain, and if you haven't, be honest. Help me understand where you're trying to get to there relative to that question you proposed. The most powerful people in the room, from what I've identified in the past, say the least. And when I talk about my female leaders that have really guided my path to be successful, you generally tend to see them the ones that are taking more notes than they are responding and reacting. And by the time they come back at you with questions, you are generally not prepared on what they're going to ask you. That made me better because I started expecting that to happen depending on the people that are in the room.
So are loud people insecure?
I generally tend to find them to be, yes. The louder you are, the more you say, you have just told me who I'm dealing with, and there's a certain level of insecurity that they go down path on, and that creates my leverage because now I know how to work you for a deal.
And so you think that it's sort of based on overcompensation?
Yes, if you're loud and you're saying a lot, you're exposing. I'm collecting. I learned this from one of my leaders. I'm collecting any and everything you're giving to me because you're telling me everything. And the louder you are, the more insecure you are. And here's what tends to happen with individuals that are extremely loud. And, you all should get the theme of what we mean from a loudness-based perspective, right? You're going to get my point where you're given a little bit of power, the louder people get when that tells you just how much power they don't have relative to this piece of that. And it's because more times than not, they're not confident in what they're trying to convey over. They're just not.
The funny thing is, it harkens back to the point I made a couple of segments ago about the guy in the room, and he was just talking about a subject that we weren't talking about. So not only was he talking about this subject, he was also very loud about it, raising his voice, vociferous. And it got to the point where, as I said, it turned everybody off. And so I don't know if he was insecure or whatever, but I know that it was definitely, to some point, performative. But it did not achieve his goal. And I think the key for this and what we're doing is we want to help you achieve your goal. And if you have a point to make, we want you to know that's not the way to make it. It's not the time, it's not the place. Loudness equals not getting your point across.
It's, to a degree, it's a need for validation. Forced validation from that standpoint is what I've run across. The energy isn't always the issue. Right? It's the lack of control.
100%. Because I think that back to my example, if he had prefaced his interjection with control, I think people would have listened. But he started with such volume that it immediately turned everyone off, and it immediately was a topic of conversation between those who were in charge after the meeting had disengaged. And so that's not a positive.
No. It's funny. So to build off your point, and I often say this, I have a mentee of mine, female mentee, who's taken over leadership of a group. And as we've gone through this process, we talked about this topic, which was the loud often being insecure, some things that she experienced from prior leadership. And we went into kind of a Real Housewives. I don't know why we went here. Don't
It's a good example,
quote
though.
me,
It's a
right?
it's a
But
great example.
so the feedback I gave her is I said, okay, you've done all this work to show up in a space as an expert, right? You've cared for you've weaponized your whole grooming, your appearance. You shop with a plan to make sure that you're going to show up effectively, whether you're balling on a budget or whatever. From that standpoint, I'm going to show up as though I have executive presence, which is what we're all striving for to a degree. Whatever that executive presence, whatever that industry may be, you're seen as somebody that's serious about their business. That's what we're all trying to get to, right? We talk about command and presence and walking in a room as though you're the protagonist and making sure that people respect the aura that comes along with it. Now imagine that all happening and the next thing you are is loud and throwing drinks around tables and everybody look at me, look at who I am. What often leads to that person crying next in the next scene because they don't have their act together. They just figured you'd ignore all the insecurities and all the the turbulent waters that they're trying to navigate, appearing as though they're a duck above it, right? Through that process, they think the loudness will fool somebody, and it literally is not. Can you imagine taking all that work? I asked you that question around how somebody talked you out of respect, being loud and insecure, and thinking that that's hiding from people the fact that all of this was fake and you were just an imposter. That's what loudness and insecurity leads to. It eliminates all the other great work that you've done. You've got to be measured and ensure that you're talking a lot less, you're listening a lot more and observing, and you've got to avoid being that loud one.
And I don't want people to get the wrong idea of there's nothing wrong with passion.
Oh
There's
yeah,
nothing
not
wrong
at
with
all.
energy. There's nothing wrong with engaging. There's nothing wrong with, having a subject that's dear to your heart that you are passionate about. But, there is something wrong with it being your only coat that you wear. And so you don't want to be a broken record.
Correct.
And you also want to be a record that is, scheduled as opposed to breaking up the flow of something that you're supposed to be a part of, that you understand you're supposed to be a part of, but you've
Mhm.
now disrupted.
What tends to happen to the point you're
Mhm.
making is the loudness and insecurity. You're going to get challenged in those spaces, and all you do when you get challenged is you ramp up the volume. Right? That is the quickest way because pressure signals leadership and how you handle pressure from that standpoint. Right? I would say, and the reaction and how you engage in that. Are you a still leader who can calm the situation through when you're being challenged and you're dealing with that pressure? Or are you an individual that just turns the volume up to 20 when the dial goes to 10?
And I think that goes straight to conversational discipline. If
Talk
you
about it.
don't have the understanding of what's interrupting versus leading a conversation, then you clearly don't have conversational discipline. And I think that it's all part and parcel of it. It's knowing the nuance of being in a room, leading a room, engaging in a room, and flowing with a room. And you want that ebb and flow. You want that energy. You don't want to be a roadblock in a room. And that, I think, is understanding, as I said, conversational discipline.
So the way I think about conversational discipline is it's music. There's a certain rhythm that you go down path on. Control is rhythm. You're really trying to not control is rhythm. You're trying to control the rhythm, not the airtime as a leader. And this I speak to the leaders that may jump into these conversations and those that are trying to really enhance their standard from that standpoint. You're controlling the jazz, right? And your I would say interrupting is ego, leading is awareness through the
Mm.
process from a conversational based perspective. Your goal is not to be cutting people off, and your patience may wear thin for individuals. And not to say, we want to be fair. There's some times where you just go, okay, listen, we've hit the apex of where we're going from that standpoint, but that should be happening a lot less than a lot more from a leadership based perspective, right? You've got to be able to respect and redirect the room. That shows strong leadership from that standpoint. And that's where I try to go because ultimately it comes down to the balance element on leading a conversation versus interrupting to show your whole command and presence. Again, you've done a lot of work to end up in a space. You don't want to be seen as a person that's rigid, unforming, and just dare to dominate. That's that whole loudness element that breeds insecurity, in my humble opinion, as you go down path on this. Timing and tone matter as you engage, is the way I put it.
100%. And I
Mhm.
think that It's confidence and humility balance,
Yeah.
respecting people without submitting. And I think, I'm going to say it again, respecting people without submitting. And I think that it's a lot. And people as human beings, I think that we've got all these boundaries within our psyche.
Hmm.
And it's like sometimes the word submission and respect, I think, are just thrown out and we don't really understand what we're talking about. So I'd love for us to go down that rabbit hole.
Hmm. This builds off the point we made before. A lot of folks right now that are probably that listen to these type of conversations are feeling that they're imposters. And that this, an imposter will submit easily. Easily. They'll go along with anything within any given room because they just want to do whatever they can to survive and stay in said room. You've done all this work to better yourself. You've done all this work to set a standard. And the minute you get in there, you submit. Period. Right? From that standpoint. And what I would say, there's certain things that a gentleman does is we show respect, but we never shrink ourselves at all. If you're going to do the work on the front end, please don't get in a space of where you're submitting immediately.
And I don't want people to confuse submitting with being loud.
Correct.
I mean, not submitting with being loud, rather. It's a fine line and a fine dynamic because being loud is being disrespectful.
Sure.
So it's like you're respecting people without submitting, which is why I keep repeating it's like a mantra. It's not about being loud. It's not about it's just understanding the flow of the conversation. It goes back to understanding that balance, that conversational discipline. And it's also something that's learned. I learned it over time. And as someone new, you haven't really been going to meetings. You wouldn't understand the ebb and flow. So it's not something that you'd pick up immediately, but it's crucial in understanding the structure of conducting yourself in that room, in those meetings, and how you conduct your conversation with that fine line of discipline, respect, without being submissive.
So the cap I'd put on that is say, look, you don't need permission to carry yourself like you belong.
Mm-mm.
You don't need anyone's permission to do that. There's certain tactical things you can do to really nail this. First and foremost, I say firm handshake, steady tone as you're going through your strategy within this space. Because that's what we're talking about, your strategy. No over apologizing from that
No,
standpoint.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt. Just interrupt and say what you have to say.
You're going through that process. You're
Oh,
consistently
no.
apologizing. You're going that path. Literally, when we talk about submission, to the point you made, is being seen as somebody who is you literally lowering yourself to be accepted. It is clear when that is happening to others as you're going through the process, and no over explaining on what you're pulling through. Your goal is to establish a story, and the story should resonate, right? From that standpoint, ask when individuals may want more information, but when you're over explaining, you're talking yourself out and you're loud, you're removing the authority that comes along with everything you've built to get yourself in that space. You do not need permission to carry yourself like you belong in that room. The one thing that a mentor told me forever ago, and I noted this just to make sure this didn't escape this conversation: respect is given, submission is chosen. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because he
That's
was talking to
brilliant.
me. Well, he was talking to me in a sense. He was like, "You look like you shrunk in that room." He gave me the feedback as to how that was, and he was like, "You're talking, it." He goes, "I know you knew your stuff, but the way you explained it, this goes into that professor commentary. You explained it so much that as you were trying to sell us on an idea versus a command of the content that you put together." And he goes, "You didn't tell us the story. You tried to get us to the end goal without explaining us how to get there in a way that resonated with the audience." From that standpoint, you were over explaining, excessive apologizing. You were attentive to everyone in a sense where you were talking too much. And I said, I had to break that habit early
Mhm.
on. And that was one of the things that lowered my authority in that room. And I'm talking to individuals that want to be leaders. That is noticed, right? That comes up when you're being considered for opportunities. Never ask for permission on how to carry yourself like you belong in a room, but you have to be studied around what it takes to be there. And there's tactical ways about going about that, right? So respect is given, submission is chosen. If you think about that in that way, how am I going to be on the other side of that where respect is given?
Yep, that is the conundrum. But
Yeah.
you can also respect the room without losing yourself in it.
The key thing here, a key line to take away we talk about is a gentleman shows respect but never shrinks himself. Ultimately, that's our goal. The whole thing here that we wanted to kind of get across, and hopefully you pulled out of our conversation today, is conduct. And these are some of our key things we want y'all to walk away with. Conduct is what people remember when you leave the room, right? Your command, your presence, the way you showed up, and how you performed on that stage, which is, by the way, as the protagonist, is what you've
You are
done.
on the stage.
You are on the stage. Presence is what they feel while you're on it and while you're in it from that standpoint. Are you judging yourself? And are you asking for feedback, by the by? Right? That's a part of the process. It's a part of your learning. It's a part of your growing. If you're not doing it, you are consistently failing yourself. Consistently. Because you are your worst enemy when it comes to critiquing. You're often your worst critic. And you're also the one that lets you be comfortable in certain settings when you shouldn't be. And we will let ourselves skate. And if you're doing that consistently and you're the only one asking yourself for feedback and advice, you're failing yourself. You've got to get better. Standards aren't followed, they're set. And how do you show up and how you set yours will speak volumes around how your career progresses, in my humble opinion. It spoke for mine.
And that is today's Gentleman Standard.
Thank you for the time today. Hopefully you found
Thanks
it
for
of
being here,
value.
guys. Thanks for being here, guys.